Today's date is March 7th, 1978, and we're in the library, the Model Colony Room of the Ontario City Library. My guest today is Mr. Austin W. Ehrnman, an outstanding citizen of our area, banker, and humanitarian. So, Mr. Ehrnman, as you think back on the years that you've been in the Ontario area, what are some of your recollections?
Well, of course, my first recollection, Ontario had a population of some 14,000 or a little better when I first arrived here in October of '46. Upland community was around 6,000. Of course, there was a Cucamonga, but very little Alta Loma and Etiwanda in that area. It was nothing. I was even at that time impressed by the dairy industry that had developed in this valley here and its continuance today. There are many things that surprise me. Today, going back that far, land prices and the economy, which I am trained in, and things of that nature, is just unbelievable.
That's right.
When I go back to '46.
What were lots selling for back then? Do you recall?
Well, yes, I bought a lot at 659 West Granada Court. It was surrounded by orange groves, and this was in '53. We still had orange groves in that area, and at that time I paid some $50 a front foot for a 70-foot lot, which of course is unheard of today. Built a home there and lived in it a few years and moved it on. It's still there and it looks good.
Yes, yes. How has banking changed over the years?
Banking, of course, has changed tremendously. Where it's an extremely competitive industry, it's fine. We thrive on competition. But with the advent of savings and loan associations, small loan companies, credit unions within organizations, and so it makes it competitive. But banking has done well, and it's doing well. One thing that's helped us in this area, in a growth from one bank in 1946 to 20 offices today scattered around through our trade area, is the influx of population. I understand that this is probably within the Riverside, the Tri-County area, is about the fastest growing area in the United States. And we're still looking at it that way in that favor of continued growth. What we're going to do with all the people, but then...
Good question.
Good question is right.
I see where Rancho Cucamonga recently became incorporated.
Yes.
And they anticipate that growth pattern is going to be someday the hub of all of San Bernardino County, with the largest population within its boundaries of any city, exceeding that of San Bernardino or Riverside, any of the other cities that there are.
Well, I think that's obviously true. It's a beautiful area. Of course, we get a good storm like this about every 6 or 8 years, and a lot of people that don't know the area wonder, well, what am I doing here?
Right.
But it happens. It is a foothill area, and those mountains have to drain, and the creeks and the flood control basins that they've prepared for them. When you get a big one like that, like we've had the last month or so, just can't take the water. And then they go out and they wonder, well, what's the city of Cucamonga and the county of San Bernardino going to do for me?
That's right.
There's a little irony in it, too. It's the growth of the area. Today, I guess they're voting on a new high school bond for the area. Or I don't vote in the area anymore. I hope to get it. They're certainly going to need it.
They will eventually.
We have to educate these youngsters and young people today. There's no question about it. Things will get a lot worse if we don't.
That's right. The costs are skyrocketing. They'll be 2 or 3 times as expensive to do it in a couple of years from now as it would be right now.
Yes, that's true.
Well, in looking over our checklist on the questionnaire, I'd like to ask a little bit about your parents, where they were born, and what type of work they were doing.
All right. Both my parents were born in Marshall, Missouri. It's a little town down in the central part of the state. It's a college town right in the Missouri Valley, and that is the name of the local college. My father, until the time we moved to Kansas City, Missouri, which I was born in 14 and that we moved to Kansas City in 1918, was a hardware merchant. I'm sorry, he was a grocery merchant. And then in Kansas City developed into a hardware merchant, eventually owning his own business. My mother worked from time to time in their early married life, and I have one brother, and when we were growing up, she worked at the mail order division of Montgomery Ward and Company in Kansas City for some 18 years. And helped get the two boys through high school and fresh jeans now and then and what it took. Other than that, that was about the extent of their business experiences. Things were kind of rough. That was in 1918, of course, that was after the war, after the First World War. And my father just felt a need to move his family to the city, more or less, which thousands of people, millions of people do today. So Marshall, Missouri is about 90 miles from Kansas City.
How big's the population of Marshall?
Oh, I don't really know, but I don't suppose it's over 20,000 today, probably. But we moved to Kansas City, and there were more opportunities, of course, for my father. We grew up there, my brother and I.
What is your brother doing today?
My brother is retired, as I am. He's a little older than I am. He's legitimately retired, and I'm retired on physical disability.
You look the picture of health, but sometimes...
Well, I had open heart surgery in June of '71, and I've been pretty good since then, but have to be careful.
Yes, don't overdo. What were some of your earliest recollections of the area itself, aside from the banking changes? The people, who were the important people of that time that you came in contact with?
Well, of course, I met many of the shoemakers were very important people in the community. At that time, they were farmers. There's a host of dairymen. I can hardly recall all their names. Dairy industry prevailed, and remembering the old commercial part of Ontario, I remember the old J.C. Penney store when it was on the west side of the street. Ober's Market, grocery market, was on Euclid Avenue. Old Adams Hardware on Euclid Avenue. And many of those old businesses that went several years ago. Agriculture was the main base of Ontario at that time. The bank was actually originally developed and built on the dairy business. And it's still a thriving business in this area. It's being pushed further and further out, but still considerable amount around Chino, and I live down at Mira Loma, which is by Norco and Corona. You may be familiar with it. Of course, it's surrounded with the dairy industry.
How did you happen to get into banking?
Well, it's a long story. If you would like for me to go back a little ways, I'll be happy to. As a child, growing up in Kansas City, Missouri, at about 10 or 12 years old, I went to work in a little cleaning shop. I worked an hour in the mornings before school and 2 hours after school for $2 a week. Well, it was pretty good money for a kid in those days. And there was a drugstore on the corner.
Bob Collins, line 3, please. Bob Collins, line 3.
92, you are. Yeah. Okay, now as you were saying?
Well, I think I left off saying there was a drugstore on the corner from this cleaning shop where I worked worked when I was a kid. And the druggist, after a year or so, offered me a job in the drugstore, which I accepted as a delivery boy and a soda jerk. And that lasted for 7 years while I got through high school. And after high school, or during my tenure in the drugstore, I met an individual who worked for the Commerce Trust Company in Kansas City. And he encouraged me to come down to the bank and make an application when I finished high school. There was one thing I was positive about. I wasn't going to be a hardware man. And my dad never pushed me, but it didn't appeal to me. And banking I thought would, and it has. I was with the Commerce Trust Company for, I guess, another 7 years, which from 33 to 41, 8 years. Then we picked up our haunches, my wife and my son and I, and we moved to California. Prior to that, our move to California, I had taken a civil service examination for a position of a national bank examiner with the U.S. Treasury Department. Kansas City being in the 10th Federal Reserve District, and California is in the 12th Federal Reserve District, they told me that I would probably have a much better opportunity of an appointment in the 12th District rather than the 10th District. So anyway, we moved to California, and within 5 days from the time I left home, I had another job with the old First National Bank of Vernon, out on the eastern portion of Los Angeles, of which I worked for only a few months, and then I went to work for Bank of America. I worked in their 7th and Figueroa office in Los Angeles for a couple of years, until which time my appointment did come through as a national bank examiner with the U.S. Treasury Department. So all this time I was studying banking and practically working in banking. One of the interesting aspects of my tenure as a national bank examiner, in 1942, I was drafted. Though I was a father, my son was 4 or 5 years old. But I'd gone through my military physical and was on call, and my chief of the examining department in San Francisco called me and said, "I'd like to send you on an assignment to Honolulu." I said, "Well, Chief, I'm in the Army. I'm gone in 10 days. And he asked where my draft board was, and I informed him it was in Kansas City, Missouri, where I lived when I registered. So the next morning I got a telegram from my draft board giving me permission to leave the continental United States on an assignment with the U.S. Treasury Department. Well, we supposed, of course, that we were going over to make a routine examination of the Bishop National Bank, as there was no division of the Treasury Department in the islands at that time. Bishop National acted as agent for the Treasury Department. So we were going over to make this examination of the bank, and they had, I guess 8 or 10 branches scattered out over the various islands. Well, we were 9.5 days from San Francisco to Honolulu. People today can get there in much less than 9.5 hours. But as it were, we were in a Navy convoy. We were on an old cement boat, the USS Permanente. And as I said, we were 9.5 days to Honolulu, and they disembarked us in Pearl Harbor. And we started our routine examination of the bank, but to our surprise, the examiners, if I remember right, there were 7 of us on this crew. What we had down in the hold of this old cement boat was $142 million in Hawaii currency. Do you remember United States currency with the bold letters Hawaii marked across the back? And we took the first issue of this $142 million to the islands to put in circulation. We didn't know this. And the reason for this, and I cannot verify it, I have never verified it, but we were told on the grapevine that the Japanese had counterfeited United States money in 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s, and that they were going to put it in circulation through the Hawaiian Island group. So that was the reason for overmarking present currency with the bold Hawaii letters on the back to stop this circulation. So we checked the money into the Bishop National, and in about 4 or 5 days they decreed that no U.S. currency was good in the islands except that overmarked with the word Hawaii, and people went to the banks and exchanged their regular currency for the overmarked currency. Just a bit of an addition to that, we also were told that the Japanese had this currency, and they were going to put it into circulation in Mexico. Well, some of us old-timers can remember, and we didn't know why, in Mexico, the only bill you could spend was a $2 bill. The Japanese had not bothered to counterfeit our $2 bill, and so therefore the Treasury Department decreed that the only U.S. currency good in Mexico during the war was a $2 bill. That's quite a story.
I should say. Did the Japanese actually flood the market then with those other?
No, they never got it out at all.
Never got it out at all.
No, there was never any of it put in service. Apparently they just forgot it. Well, they probably had to.
I imagine.
But that was one of the interesting things along the line.
I should say.
I liked my work very much with the Treasury Department, but there was an awful lot of travel involved. My son was growing up, and I was in Honolulu for 8 weeks, and I was subject to work anywhere in the 12th Federal Reserve District, and I was home about a week, and they sent me to Spokane for 8 weeks, and it was Arizona for 3 and 4 weeks at a time, and I just felt that I'd rather be back in a bank, so I went in on examination of the old First National Bank of Ontario one day with one other man. It was just the two of us, and we were in the bank all week, and the following Saturday morning, Ralph Arnold, that's Oscar Arnold's son, of course, called me and said he'd like to talk to me. Well, I thought maybe we had done something wrong, or he wasn't maybe too happy with the report or something, and would like to discuss it more than we had previously discussed it. Well, anyway, he offered me a job as a vice president, and I've been in Ontario ever since, in and around. The bank has been good to me. I'm not long on education. I did go to the University of Washington, to the Pacific Coast Banking School, which is just held on the campus of the University of Washington. You're on campus 2 weeks a year for 3 years, and you do correspondence work in between. I have a certificate from Pacific Coast Banking School as of 1953. And my experience with the various banking organizations helped me tremendously.
I should say. So you were with the Ontario Bank for how many years then, all told?
Well, I'm really still with them. I'm a
Still
director of the bank, and I'm chairman of the Directors Examining Committee, and that would be from 46 to 78, 33 years.
3 years.
Getting close to 32 years. 46 to 78. 32 years this October.
Well, you've seen a lot of changes come and go, and did they finally catch up with you in the draft, or were they able to work?
I never heard another word from them. I reported back to them when I returned to the continental United States, as they requested me to. I sent a telegram and informed them I was now back in the continental United States, and never heard another word.
Evidently they figured your work was more important than you had done it.
Maybe they had. But there was one other interesting element that might be interesting in this conversation is our Euclid Avenue. We drove out from Kansas City in February of 1941. My wife and son and I moved out here, and that was old 66 highway at the time. And when we got into Ontario, we decided to cut south to 99, which was Holt Boulevard, or A Street in those days, Holt Boulevard now. And as we were driving down the boulevard, my wife made a remark of what a beautiful little town. So wouldn't it be something to live in a community like this?
Mm-hmm.
And without trying, we ended up here. I've been very happy with it ever since.
Yes.
But the boulevard's changed a lot.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
The wind takes care of that.
Yes, to a great extent. To a great extent. Was Euclid at that time a two-way drive?
Just as it is
As it
today.
is today.
Just exactly as it is
Just like
today.
it is today.
Only we didn't have the traffic signals, of course. Even at Foothill Boulevard, which it was old 66 or is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall traffic signals there. They could have been there. But, yeah, I just don't recall. But there was no traffic signals from there to A Street, which is now Holt Boulevard. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the price of land on Holt Boulevard, 2 or 3 instances. The Kelber family, which is prevalent here in Ontario, had a war surplus store out on East Holt, and Jimmy's original self-service station also on East Holt. And they wanted to buy some land out on West Holt. And the land they purchased is today their head office of Jimmy's Incorporated and Terminal Stations Incorporated and others. And I don't remember the cost of the land, what they paid for it out there. But I do remember one thing. Mr. Oscar Arnold said it was an absolutely ridiculous price to pay for that land. And there wasn't much out there in those days. Maybe they paid 100 or 150. It was front foot or something for it. But anyway, of course, everyone knows it was a great price to pay. And the Kelbers know that too.
That's right.
And of course, they're still prevalent in the community. Mike was a councilman, and I've known Mike for as many years as I've been here, I guess. And Sam, who actually operated the stations, and the Jimmy station. And another brother, Phil, who is connected with the service stations. But they're an old-time family that have done well and have done well for the community.
And Dr. Kelber, who's the veterinarian.
Yeah, he's a member of your library board. Yes.
Right.
He's a cousin to the other Kelbers.
Oh.
Well, he's a cousin. Very fine boy. I spent a lot of time with Dr. Kelber. We're both over my desk in the bank and as a Rotarian in Rotary. Very fine boy. Rose his wife, a very fine girl.
Yes, Rose is quite a woman. Now, we also checked the early travel. How were things in those days compared with now? You came across country on 66?
I did, and I had a 1934 Chevrolet. No, I'll tell you about it. It was a 1935 Chevy. And this was in 1941, in February. And of course I had my wife and my son, and everything else I owned was in that automobile. Well, it proceeded to catch on fire 2 different times. I didn't lose any possessions or anything, but fortunately the fire was smoldering the felt on the bottom side of the back seat, which was caused by a split in the muffler, and the heat from the muffler got it to smoldering, and I had the back end so full of my belongings it couldn't get any oxygen to burn, so it caught on fire the second time before we found out what it was. But that was quite an experience. Another experience was when we first came down through Cajon Pass. I previously remarked about the remark that the wife made when we come down Euclid Avenue. When we come down through Cajon Pass, we'd been through New Mexico, of course, and Arizona, and it was cold. We'd spent the night in Needles. And as we come down through Cajon Pass into this beautiful green valley, I'll tell you, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I don't see why everybody wouldn't want to live in Southern California, and particularly in this area. But I'm glad they don't, because if they did, there wouldn't be room for me.
Wouldn't be room enough to turn around. Very true. Yeah. What were some of the early forms of recreation and?
Well, I was never very athletic. I was always very small. I was a member of my high school tumbling team.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, what was usual as a kid, I played a little tennis, and I've got 4 broken fingers to show that I played some baseball. But that's about all. I was never big enough. I got married when I was a kid. I was 19 and my wife was 20. We were soon 20 and 21, but that has anything to do with it. But I only weighed 118 pounds when I got...
Not exactly.
So, no, I wasn't football material. Or swimming either, as far as that goes. Though I did swim, I wasn't much at it.
Mm-hmm. Well, who are some of the people you've dealt with in city government or state government?
Well, let's see. I guess I dealt with all your city councils. I was chairman of the Parking Place Commission for 9 years. Boy, that goes back to Chuck Latimer when he was mayor. Mike Kilber was on the council at that time. I dealt with George McQuarters when he was mayor. I guess I had some dealing with all of them, practically, to some extent. I know there was a little pressure put on me at one time to run for the city council, but I had all I could handle with the bank and without the politics. I've been through this all my life.
Slight interruptions, right. Okay, on the state level, have you had anything to do with the state officials?
Not too much, other than through the legislative committee with the California Bankers Association and the Independent Bankers Association of Southern California. I was on both committees, and we dealt with our representatives in the state government. As you probably know, the CBA is really a lobbying organization for banking and promotion. And so is the Independent Bankers Association to a certain extent. And I did serve on their legislative committees. And, well, we'd have receptions for them. And of course, I'd always meet them. And Senator Coombs, who was the senator when I retired, that was kind enough to pass the Senate, or propose a Senate resolution in my behalf. I was very close to him, of course. And I've had some connection with all of them, basically, though, through these 2 committees, bank-related. I never had much time for politics. I mean, from a participation standpoint. Well, for so many years, we were a 2-man bank. After Mr. Arnold Sr. died and Ralph took over the bank, Ralph Arnold, that is, it was Ralph and myself for many years until we started branching out, and we had to then seek additional help. My son, who's in the bank now, kind of followed my footstep. He too was a national bank examiner, and we talked him out of leaving the service and coming with the bank. Yeah.
I notice here also we check under tales told by grandparents. What do you recall hearing as a youngster?
Well, my mother's father, my grandfather Payne, was a Civil War veteran. And in my younger years, he lived in the Confederate home at Higginsville, Missouri, which was built specifically for Civil War veterans. And it's just the many tales that, as a child, he used to tell me. We used to sit out in the old swings that would rock back and forth, and he would tell the tales. I suppose some of them were true, and none of any great significance. It's other than that's one of the main things I remember about
Leonard Wheeler, please call Children's. Leonard, call Children's.
My other grandfather, I scarcely knew. I don't even know what his occupation was.
Mm-hmm.
He died when I was quite young and
Mm-hmm.
never had an opportunity to know him at all.
Mm-hmm. Had the first grandfather served throughout the whole of the Civil War?
To my knowledge, he was in the thick of it.
The thick of it.
Mm-hmm. From the tales he used to tell, and as I say, at those days my eyes popped, but today really wouldn't be much.
Yes.
But as a child, they were quite impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, most of his tales were of the hardships that they went through
Mm-hmm.
in the service in those days.
Yes, it was pretty much live off the land without.
Whatever they could beg, borrow, or steal.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's appropriate or not, but he used to tell of how they used to actually have to steal to eat
Mm-hmm.
from the farmers and those, which I suppose is true.
Foraging, as they used to call it.
Yes,
In order
foraging.
to live off the land and not starve to death.
Yes.
Game. Appropriations.
Yes.
Sometimes the farmers got paid back by the authorities, and other times they just didn't.
I suppose that's true.
Requisitions somehow got lost on the battlefield. They didn't get
Yes.
compensated for it. But that was quite a struggle. Quite a struggle.
Well, it's easy to understand. There was little communication and practically no transportation as we know it today.
Right. Well, what do you see for the future of banking as you've known it in the past?
Well, I think banking as a whole has a very bright future, particularly in this trade area, because it is a rapidly growing area. And I suppose it's appropriate for me to say so, but I think we're much over-supervised nowadays. Within the last 5 years, you wouldn't believe the paperwork that we have to do just to keep up with federal regulations. I'm not saying that the regulations aren't good, but I'm not saying they are either, all of them. But it's on us, and we have to put up with it. I think we're going to see much more branching, because only thing it takes now for a branch is check for $500 with your application. No survey or review or anything anymore. You want a branch, you say you want it, send me a check and you'll get it. Of course, national banks are controlled under the jurisdiction of the Treasury Department through the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. In other words, what I'm saying, the Comptroller of the Currency is under the Treasury Department. And they more or less control national banks. They enforce the National Banking Act of 1933. And they also enforce all your Federal Reserve regulations. Federal Reserve enforce their own regulations through state banks who are not members of the Fed, plus through state banks that may be a member of the Fed. It's optional with a state bank if you want to be a member of the Fed. But I tell you, the supervision we have now is tremendous. And it's not only the federal government, it's state, county, and this agency and that agency. But we're surviving. The bank is progressing. We had one of the best years we ever had last year, and we're looking forward to 78, another good year. I'm concerned about our overall economy of the United States, quite concerned. Our balance of payments, I think, is just out of this world. Yesterday morning, I think it was, our national debt was some $730 billion. There's a lot of people can't even write $1 billion, let alone realize what it is. I hesitate to say what the interest on that debt is, but it's certainly considerable.
It is.
2 out of every 5 people today work for government. That's not only federal, but I mean all phases of government. 2 out of every 5.
That's hard to believe.
That's true. In one sense or another. We keep talking about energy shortage. And again, I don't like to get into the politics of the area, but if we do have an energy shortage, and I'm not convinced we do, but if we do, and if it's as serious as our national administration tries to relate to us, then why in the heck don't we ration gasoline like we did during the war? You went through it, I went through it, we didn't have any problem. We didn't run around all the time like
That's right.
And we were careful where we went, but both tires were rationed, gasoline certainly was rationed. So I just can't think it's serious or we'd have it. I think it can get serious.
Yes.
And it requires attention. But you've got a president and a Congress that don't seem to agree on much of anything. It's awfully hard to legislate.
Yes, it is.
And they're just not getting very far. I'm most concerned about the sinking of the value of the United States dollar overseas. I think today I heard an announcement, I believe this morning, that in West Germany you could get 2.5 marks per dollar. It wasn't long ago you got 10 marks for a dollar. People confront me with this. Can I tell a funny little story along here in this thing? Well, it's the story of the egg. Now, I don't know how old you are, but I'm sure you can remember when you bought an egg for maybe 4 cents, 5 cents at the most. So today you'll pay maybe up as high as 15 cents for the same egg. You break that egg, same egg you paid a nickel for, not a bit of difference, absolutely same content in it. So what that tells, the story it really tells, is that the egg hasn't changed, the money's just cheaper. That's all. The money's just not worth what it was. I think we can attribute it to an awful lot of things. Welfare program contributes to it. I think organized labor contributes to it. I'm not against either one of them, but they're growing at such a pace that eventually we're going to have some control over it. I was talking at the bank this morning. I think interest rates are going to do nothing but go up. When interest rates go up, just means your money's worth just that much less. So you'll be carrying it around in a bushel basket sometime. You go to a grocery store.
It used to be, I understand, in Japan, when things dropped so low, they had to have a whole bushel basket to buy a loaf of bread.
I think there's ways to control it, but with the political element involved in controlling anything of that nature, it's just useless to think about it. Because they don't want to give up that many votes, if politics does have anything to do with it, to legislate these type of programs, especially in a year when you have an election year and half of your House of Representatives being elected and about half of your Senate, I guess, or more. And a presidential year, you might as well try not to get anything through.
Everybody wants to check it, but nobody wants to take the initiative and the responsibility and the outcry. But where do you put the brakes on? Where do you put the lid on? More and more demands for more and more things, and the union cry, one word, what do you want? More.
Well, sure, and the unions get more, and no one would ever want to go back. My wife's father was a coal miner in Missouri, and he died of a heart attack at a very young age, 42, I think, or 43. I never knew him. I never met the man. So that's hard work. And old John L. Lewis done a lot for the miners in those days. They did need help. But I think it's gone too far. Like you mentioned, there must be a brake of some kind put in there, or some type of control. But with our political system, which I'm for 100%, I don't think anything's going to be done about it.
Who's going to put the brakes on and how?
Well, when you've got 2 out of every 5 working for the government along the way somewhere, there's not much brake there anymore. Not much brake there. I think this election we have coming up in June with this Jarvis referendum is going to tell a story one way or the other. What it'll be, I don't know. I know what my preference is, but I think it's going to tell them something.
Mm-hmm. It will. It'll shake them up.
That's right. And if Jarvis didn't do anything else, he got our legislature in Sacramento to move, and then they where what they have done is going to help. There's no question about it. Before they've been 5 or 6 years and had nothing. So these things happen and come, but I look at my 5 young grandchildren. My son will be 42. At the burden he carries today, not only the burden of his own family, he has the burden of his future with his Social Security tax, and he's got to save a little. Plus he has the burden of the older people, the welfare program and the complete Social Security program. It's an awful burden on the middle class people.
Somebody has to carry it, and they're the ones that shoulder the heaviest load.
Awful burden on them.
Well, let's hope it works. Excuse me. Out all right.
Well, I don't know whether there's anything any better.
I don't either.
But this don't seem to work too well all the time. But you had asked about the future of this area, of the bank. And I just think it's tremendous. I think the area is going to have nothing but substantial, solid growth. I think they got some problems. At a school problem, there's no question about it. I think they have sewer problem. That is the filter plant anyway of accommodating what's going in. That's going to restrict building. And the thing that really makes the wheels turn is your building industry. You stop to think when you build a house what it takes. New refrigerator, rugs, furniture, vacuum sweeper, washing machine, telephone, everything.
Everything that goes into the making of a modern home.
That's right. You hit all areas, and that's really what makes the wheels go around. But I don't know how they can shoulder the debt, some of these young people.
It's getting to a place now where they need 2 families, 2 members of the family working in order to provide what Dad used to, by way of comparison.
I can remember the day when we had 2 families had to live together to make it in one residence. We lived upstairs, and an aunt and uncle and their child lived downstairs. Well, it was necessary.
That's right.
It was necessary to cut it. That was in 1919.
That's right.
I don't want to go back any further than that.
Excuse me.
With me on my YMCA board for years.
He did, huh?
Yeah, I guess he's probably still a member of the Y board. I don't know.
Yeah, Mr. Kamansky's been a very busy boy throughout the whole of the area. He has. Today's date is March 7th, 1978, and we're in the library, the Model Colony Room of the Ontario City Library. My guest today is Mr. Austin W. Ehrnman, an outstanding citizen of our area, banker, and humanitarian. So, Mr. Ehrnman, as you think back on the years that you've been in the Ontario area, what are some of your recollections?
Well, of course, my first recollection, Ontario had a population of some 14,000 or a little better when I first arrived here in October of 46. Upland community was around 6,000. Of course, there was a Cucamonga, but very little Alta Loma and Etowanda in that area. It was nothing. I was even at that time impressed by the dairy industry that had developed in this valley here and its continuance today. There are many things that surprise me. Today, going back that far, land prices and the economy, which I am trained in, and things of that nature, is just unbelievable.
That's right.
When I go back to 46.
What were lots selling for back then? Do you recall?
Well, yes, I bought a lot at 659 West Granada Court. It was surrounded by orange groves, and this was in 53. We still had orange groves in that area, and at that time I paid some $50 a front foot for a 70-foot lot, which of course is unheard of today.
Mm-hmm.
Built a home there and lived in it a few years and moved it on.
Mm-hmm.
It's still there and it looks good.
Yes. Yes. How has banking changed over the years?
Banking, of course, has changed tremendously. Where it's an extremely competitive industry, it's fine. We thrive on competition. But with the advent of savings and loan associations, small loan companies, credit unions within organizations, and so it makes it competitive. But banking has done well, and it's doing well.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's helped us in this area, in a growth of from one bank in 1946 to 20 offices today scattered around through our trade area, is the influx of population.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that this is probably within the Riverside, the Tri-County area, is about the fastest growing area in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still looking at it that way, in that
Yes.
favor of continued growth.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going to do with all the people, but then...
Good question.
Good question.
Good
Is
question.
Right.
I see where Rancho Cucamonga recently became incorporated.
Yes.
And they anticipate that growth pattern is going to be someday the hub of all of San Bernardino County, with the largest population within its boundaries of any city, exceeding that of San Bernardino and Riverside, any of the other cities that there are.
Well, I think that's obviously true. It's a beautiful area. Of course, we get a good storm like this about every 6 or 8 years, and then a lot of people that don't know the area wonder, well, what am I doing here?
Right.
But it happens. It is a foothill area, and those mountains have to drain, and
Mm-hmm.
The creeks and the flood control basins that they've prepared for them. When you get a big one like that, like we've had the last month or so, just can't take the water.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go out and they wonder, well, what's the city of Cucamonga and the county of San Bernardino going to do for me?
That's right.
There's a little irony in it, too. It's the growth of the area. Today, I guess they're voting on a new high school bond for the area. Or I don't vote in the area anymore. I hope to get it. They're certainly going to need it.
They will eventually.
We have to educate these youngsters and young people today. There's no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
Things will get a lot worse if we don't.